Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here as often enough with Kevin Nude. Kevin, how's it going?
It's going. We're here in Indianapolis at the NFL Scouting Combine. We are finishing up day 2 of the media interviews. There are various schedules. I mean, we're technically on day 3 of the Combine because of how the things work. Day 2 for us.
Day 2 for us. That's really all that matters. Today was defensive backs and tight ends. That's all it was here. So Ohio State, we saw Lathan Ransom to start the day, then Jordan Hancock, then Denzel Burke. But first, you've been to a bunch of these. The mass of people around Travis Hunter. Did you happen upon that? Where does that rank some of the larger group mass gatherings you've seen here?
I would say that it is probably somewhere in the top 3 to 5. There have been a lot of them. I mean, sometimes it's just really predicated by who else is in a certain session. If you sit there and you have 2 star quarterbacks in a session, they're going to split the crowd. And that's not taking anything away from any of the other players that were in Travis Hunter's session, but just obviously with the reigning Heisman winner and everything else, there was a lot of interest there, and it was quite deep with people there trying to roll on it with their phones, and I'm like, that's just not going to work.
Not going to work.
We do have video of it. I do have a picture of the crowd over on my Twitter account if you want to check that out as well.
Tomorrow, and I say tomorrow, Friday, will be quarterbacks, skill players, basically. And you mentioned the groups. In the same group, it's Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, and maybe Quinn Ewers. But
it was either Ewers or Milrow or something.
Yeah. And Jalen Milrow, yeah. So like those 3 are all in there. So you're going to have some people that trying to go back and forth. And really, if you leave one, you're not getting into the other. It's like, no, this club is exclusive and it's too full. You're not allowed in. So pick your poison in that one.
There's a reason I bring 3 cameras.
Yeah. And when I say pick your poison, kind of like if you're drafting any of those quarterbacks, pick your poison. So as we did yesterday with me and Mark Givler, just the elephant in the room, Tom Moore, don't worry about it. He's fine. He's not here, but it's all okay. He's got his whole life. It's me and Mark and Kevin, people who work here in Indianapolis. And so
we appreciate football.
We're not Mets fans. So in yesterday's show, basically what a lot of this is about, you're talking to these players about Ohio State, next year's players and this year's players. And I just, not 20 minutes ago, I got a DM from a scout who DM'd me a clip of me. I tweeted out of Denzel Burke talking about Mylan Graham. He's like, who the F is asking these guys about redshirt freshmen? This is about the NFL draft and their place in it. I'm like, no, it's not. This may be the NFL draft. We cover Ohio State, so we're asking about Ohio State stuff. Especially when you've got Denzel Burke, you're going to ask him because he's going to tell you exactly how it is.
Well, that and a lot of these guys, I mean, we've seen players up there for 8 minutes. We've seen players up there for 20 minutes. And you can only run down, have you heard from this team? And have you heard from that team for so long? And I mean, obviously, in the question asking phase, you want to make sure the beginning of the interview, you're talking about the player.
Yes,
you don't want to
correct.
sit there. You're like, so tell me about everybody but yourself. But no, the reason why so many people who cover the college side come here is because it's a good opportunity to be able to get a little bit more insight on what is going to be left with this crowd already here at the Combine. They're done. They're out of eligibility, what have you. And they're going to have good opinions because this is the chance. This is a chance to ask them that. So it's not a new phenomenon either.
Right. And it's not. They're also moving on with their lives. So they can be a little bit more open, because it's no longer in the locker room. So not that that's ever stopped Denzel Burke, but so that's a lot of the reason why we ask these questions, because again, we're trying to talk about this year's Ohio State football team. Lathan Ransom was asked, like everybody, like, who is replacing you? What's it going to be? You're talking about Malik Hartford, Jalen McClain, and he did not want to give. He's like, it'll be basically one of those two. I'm not going to tell you who it's going to be because I don't know, but whoever it is going to be darn good. He's been one of the few that hasn't just said it's going to be this guy, because I think maybe this is one of those positions where there is more questions than others.
Yeah, I think in certain positions there is obviously an heir apparent. This one, there are a couple, and I think that people are going to approach it a little bit differently, and I think that's a fair statement for him to make. And say, look, I'm not necessarily going to tell you, but either one of them is going to be a dog and go out there and they're going to perform. I mean, we've obviously had a chance to see a little Malik Hartford. We had a chance to see some Jalen McClain. I think we both know what they're about, but there's a lot of spring football and summer and everything else to go through.
Well, and both of those guys had a great year of learning from Lathan Ransom and Caleb Dow. So Lathan Ransom said both of those guys would just come in and study as early as possible and as late as possible with those two guys. So there's no better duo to learn from than those two. So it'll be interesting to see how they grow. And I'm fascinated to see if they're both going to be a strong safety, one over the other, or because how much work does Caleb Downs need? So is one of these guys, is Malik Hartford, who is the backup to Caleb Downs last year, free safety, is he a free safety because they need somebody there? When does the actual strong safety competition begin, if ever? So
you have spring ball that's starting soon, and obviously you don't really get back into organized stuff until fall practice begins. But I think it's something that you could take into fall practice and then really try to decide, because even at the beginning of fall practice, you're not doing install. I mean, obviously you're going to have to be with Matt Patricia coming in with a new DC and everything else. There's obviously going to be some tweaks and some things that have to be learned, but you're not going to be installing for Texas right at the beginning of that. So I think that
buckle up, boys.
Yeah,
practice one.
Exactly. But I think you have an opportunity to kind of cross train and see what the best situations are. I mean, what is going to be the strategy? I mean, obviously, they ran 4-2-5 under Jim Knowles. I mean, is it going to remain 4-2-5? Are we going to see something a little bit more traditional? Are we going to see them completely go out the box and go 3 down? I mean, we don't really have a lot of answers, and we're looking forward. Jerry, if you're watching us, we would like to talk to the coaches. We have questions.
One, and not to jump too far ahead, but Denzel Burke was talking about some players that he expects some things from this year, and he said C.J. Hicks. And I'm like, Denzel, you mentioned C.J. Hicks. Where? He's like, well, new defense, so we'll have to see. Patricia certainly high on him, which is good to hear. A guy like Denzel Burke who doesn't just throw names out, and so that was interesting. But here's another interesting point. Lathan Ransom was asked by Spencer Holbrook, Letterman Row, about Max Clare, the Purdue transfer tight end. Lathan's like, yeah, after they played, he went to Keenan Bailey. He was like, hey, this guy hits the portal. You should go after him. And so eventually they did. He did. They did. And so Lathan really, really liked him. And then Denzel was asked about him and said, like, well, in practice, Lathan shut him down. So he's like, I think it was the Spencer again. It was like, hey, Denzel, about what would you think about Max Clare? He's like, is it the Purdue? It's like, I don't know. He was pretty quiet. Lathan kind of shut him down, but Lathan was a fan, or at least respected him. And we've seen some really good stuff from him out of Purdue. And he's probably going to be one of the tight ends in the draft next year or two, whatever he chooses.
Well, and he also, obviously studying tape and everything else, had the chance to see what Max Clare was able to do in other situations. And maybe, I don't remember him having a big game against Ohio State. Not a lot of players did, honestly.
Not his fault.
Not his fault. Obviously Purdue was kind of flawed in a lot of aspects. Not a tight end. Max Clare, very good player, but I think he had the opportunity to look at tape and see some things there and be able to know. And of course, too, it goes back to the old thing. If you're beating a team, you don't want to sit there and have your fans shout overrated. That just diminishes what you did. If you're Lathan Ransom and you sit there and you shut the guy down, you don't want to sit there and say he was mid.
That's true. That's true. Arguably, this is the best tight end I've ever covered.
Exactly. So that's my worth.
That's how you're supposed to do it. Jordan Hancock talked about a lot of things, but he said he views himself as a cornerback who can play safety. And it's interesting because I think that's kind of what you need as a nickel. But he hasn't played corners a little bit last. I don't even know if he played corner last year because he was the passing nickel while Sonny was the running nickel. And so it's been a while, but he is such a guy that he's so far under the radar. I even felt bad for him because while he was talking, Travis Hunter was also going. Now, and also Jordan Hancock is one of these, you have podiums all over the rooms, but then you also have like 4 tables where I don't know who gets assigned to these tables, but it's like, it's like a kid's table almost. And so again, being overlooked. And he's talked about how he doesn't mind being under the radar because if offenses want to ignore him, then he's going to make something with it. But that's a guy they're going to miss.
Oh yeah. I mean, there was a day, not that long ago of where you sat there, you going through the guys in the secondary. I mean, I think obviously before Caleb Downs comes in and everything else. And I mean, was Jordan Hancock the most consistent performer?
Yeah.
I mean, I think because everybody had a little bit of a spell of where things didn't necessarily work out perfectly for them. And I think Hancock's versatility is going to bode well, but he's going to have to be somebody who comes out and is going to have to, he's going to be a day 3 guy, in my opinion, and he's going to have to fight for it because he's going to be battling against undrafted free agents and everything else. And, just if you have your name called, and we know by around the 6th round, they're just playing grab ass up there. I mean, you're not even necessarily hearing your name anymore, but he's going to have to compete all the way through. But I think that versatility, I mean, we've said so much about guys being cross-trained to be able to play, 4 positions on the line or all 3 linebacker positions or whatever, being able to do multiple things in the secondary, especially with a 53-man roster versus an 85-man roster, helps.
And he mentioned that 53-man roster aspect. And the thing is, like, unless you are the number 1 nickel corner who can sneak into that first round, Bradley Roby was a first-round pick, and the Broncos drafted him to be a nickel. When you're not that number 1 guy, you can fall. It almost becomes a stigma. Oh, he's nickel. Because I'll tell you, I asked Denzel Burke, hey, have any of these teams talked to you about playing inside at nickel? And he's like, yeah. And he kind of like this, I'm never doing it. But even though clearly you're willing to do it, but he views himself as an outside corner. Jordan Hancock still views himself as a corner. But it doesn't matter how you view yourself. It's how the NFL views you. And that guy, even when he got inserted into the lineup after Lathan Ransom got hurt in 2023, and Sonny moved to safety full-time, and Jordan Hancock was able to be on the field full-time, the defense got better. Or got more consistent because they were no longer switching all of this stuff. They just had the same guys out there. And finding somebody to replace him, and he was asked, who's going to replace you? He's like, well, I don't know. Yeah, you got Miles Lockhart, and I think this is the order. He said Miles Lockhart, Lorenzo Styles, Jermaine Matthews, Bryce West. Those are the 4. I don't think it's going to be Jermaine Matthews. Mark and I talked about this yesterday. Jermaine Matthews spent all spring at nickel in 2024. I just think he's too good outside and to move him inside. But that position is so important. If you've got more guys outside than you've got inside,
Right.
then, I mean, you've got to go with your best guys. And Jermaine Matthews is your best. Like, how much better does he need to be than Lorenzo Styles? I think there's still some moving parts throughout all this.
Well, we talked so much about getting your best 11 out there. Now, obviously, your best 11 players are all cornerbacks. That's just not going to work. But, I mean, you want to try and get your best 11 out there and how that works. And, we can just go back to talking about last year's offensive line for Ohio State. And, were you better by having Donovan Jackson out at tackle or keeping him at guard and trying to figure it out? And they tried that with Zen Mahalski, and it didn't necessarily work out. I mean, and then he got hurt. So when you're trying to reshuffle the deck there for inside and outside in the secondary, there's just a lot of questions with there. And it's interesting that Miles Lockhart was the first name that came up. And then the one that I guess that I didn't hear was Aaron Scott.
Yeah, no, and so I'm assuming he stays outside. Now, Bryce West was a guy that was recruited to, hey, you could be inside, you could be outside. We'll see how it goes. And so I do think he is going to be involved in some way. But also, like, I don't know that he played much nickel last year in practice. Whenever we saw him in the game, played in 7 games. I think every time we saw him outside. But he's also a guy that at Glenville, he played everywhere in the secondary. He
Right.
played quarter, he played nickel, he played free safety. So those are kind of the things you need to do if you're going to be Ohio State's nickel. You need to be able to do all of those things because Jordan Hancock could, and they certainly don't want to take a step back if they don't have to. But I don't think anybody's going to step in and be like him this year.
It's way too early to be handicapping the Big Ten at this point, but you sit there and you think about, okay, safety's playing inside the box or whatever. I mean, how many downhill teams are there in the Big Ten this year? But then again, how many prolific passing teams are there? Because there are just so many questions. So many teams are replacing quarterbacks, and you just don't necessarily know. I mean, I guess, in some ways, Penn State could maybe play downhill a little bit with its backs. Still doesn't have any receivers. I mean,
Right.
at that point, but everybody's in love with Drew Aller.
And if that's the best the Big Ten's got, maybe you don't need cornerback. So that moves us to Denzel Burke, and I'll just move to something I wrote Thursday afternoon, which was, I called it 10 big Buckeye things heard at the 2025 NFL Combine through the first 2 days. And not most of these, maybe half of these come from Denzel himself, because that's what we're here for. Basically, what I'm titling the show, I assume something about Julian Sayin, because when Denzel Burke was asked about Julian Sayin, he said, and remember, this is Denzel Burke, who doesn't, last year at Cotton Bowl, remember when Denzel Burke was asked about Jeremiah Smith? And he's like, I'll have to see him.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
He's not even in school. Let me see him. And now this is 1 year later with Julian Sayin, but he said, I think Julian is that guy, to be honest with you. Lincoln is pretty good too. I'm ready to see this little matchup they're going to have. Julian is a great player, great zip on the ball, great pocket presence. He's going to have a good career. So when he's telling me, like,
So that he's like 4X of Jeremiah Smith.
Now again, Denzel did change his tune after about 1 spring practice on Jeremiah Smith. But this is Denzel Burke saying this, because I had my questions about Julian Sayin based on what we've seen in games. But everything you hear in practice is complete opposite of 1 or 2 odd passes. So if Denzel Burke, who's, I think, more effusive in his praise of Julian Sayin than he's ever been for Will Howard, I guess I'm in now.
I was going to say the biggest Julian Sayin play I can remember is when he hit Christian on that long touchdown. It was really when Ohio State was just trying to take the guy out of the ball and get it done. But
that's mostly a catch and run.
Yeah, they didn't really let Julian Sayin get anywhere near the race car. I mean, he kind of got to just stand out there and polish it a little bit. But it's going to be an interesting battle there. And Denzel Burke, he doesn't just sit there and give you, just empty platitudes.
No, he'll give it to you like straightforward. And then, although not all the time, because one of the follow-ups was, does it remind you of anybody? And he paused, he thought, and then he smiled, and he was going to say something like, no, I'm not going to put that on him. And so it's like he had somebody in mind. When you think of arm strength or how he throws it, like there's maybe a CJ Stroud or something like that, and he like pauses, and he's like, no, I'm not going to put that on him.
Denzel Burke filter.
Hey, you know what? He's grown up. He's got the NFL to think about. He's just gone through some interviews. Like,
well, that's the thing. And they, at the Combine, they ask you a lot of weird stuff. I mean, they really do. I mean, in the rooms that they bring you in, they have games and stuff. I mean, it's just, they do everything they can to throw you off. So maybe he's already at DEFCON 2.
It's just paranoid. One of the interesting questions that the NFL the teams do ask the players is like, which of your teammates should we draft? Like, which of your teammates would you bring along with you? And if you can only bring one, who is it? I think that gives some really good insight into the way they feel about their teammates. And the way that Denzel Burke feels about Jermaine Matthews, who I believe is going to replace Denzel Burke. He said, because I asked Denzel, what do you expect out of Jermaine Matthews this year? I expect a lot out of him. He's going to go crazy, mark my words. So Jermaine Matthews, a very confident player, confident and crazy. Like that's maybe a little bit dangerous, but he could be here next year.
I was at Jermaine Matthews' announcement ceremony, and he had the shades on and everything else. And I just said, just based on attitude and everything, this kid's going to thrive. And and if Denzel's saying that he's going to go crazy, I feel very good about my prediction before he ever saw a snap.
You were there June before he got his offer at one of the camps, and Jim Knowles and Ryan Day were just working him, putting through all his bases, and he just kept responding, and he's just been responding, and he fought his way into the lineup last year and was a tremendous example for everybody else on the team. Like, hey, just stop waiting your turn, go make it happen. And he did that. I expect him to be really, really good. If I tell you that Denzel Burke had something good to say about Mylan Graham, does that surprise you a little?
I think that the cross, pollination there is a little weird for me on there. I mean, I'm very pro Mylan Graham. I think it's there. I just think that the fact that he was not a winter enrollee, that he was a summer enrollee, kind of slowed him down, and just the fact of what the receiver room was. But I think that Denzel Burke is the amazing question at this point. So nothing should surprise me.
Well, because one of the good kind of questions is certainly you want to know about, hey, like when you're talking to Ty Hamilton, I want to know about Cade McDonald. But also you can ask these guys open-ended questions like, who's the next, who are we not talking about that you think could do something for the Buckeyes this year? And that was kind of the question to Denzel Burke. And one of the players he mentioned was Mylan Graham. And then the follow-up to that, he said, yeah, he could be a great player. Me and him have been going at it a little bit in practice, but that's just me out of love, just trying to get him to get better. He's quick, has good hands, good catch radius, good releases. I'm really excited for him in his future. Talked with Mylan Graham at one of the ball games, talked with Brian Hartline at that same bowl game, and they're both very, very high. Like Hartline's very high on it. Mylan Graham talked about the difficulties early in the season and getting through them. He got to play a little bit towards the end, but no catches. And yet the expectations are still as high as ever for that guy because of all of these skill sets that Denzel Burke just said. He's quick, good hands, good catch radius, good release, and dynamic for the kids too.
In Ohio State, played almost into late January, even though a lot of times you were probably having ones versus ones at a lot of times. But there were still a lot of reps that went on there. So, I think that really benefits some of these younger guys and to get those reps against guys that are going to be playing in the league here in a few months.
I think Mylan's going to be one of those guys. If you put a list of 10, and this is something we could do, it's an easy video. Like the 10 guys you're most looking forward to in the spring. For me, he's somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Because just watching him in high school, like he was ridiculous. And then he got hurt as a senior, but his junior highlights, if you go watch them, they're as good as anybody you'll see.
Not named Jeremiah Smith.
Well, true. But or Ryan Williams. But that was Ohio State was his first offer. It was Brian Hartline seeing him and like, yep, you can play here. So I'm not waiting for Indiana to offer or Illinois or Purdue or Kentucky. Like just go after him, and they did.
That's a big thing. Being able to, we already know that Brian Hartline is a developer, but also being able to identify somebody at a point that really stood out for Mylan Graham. Ohio State was the first one in there. It wasn't Kentucky. It wasn't Illinois. It wasn't Ball State. It was Ohio State that got in there early. And there obviously was concern with what the class was. Does somebody drop out of there?
Yeah.
And Jeremiah Smith takes up a lot of the oxygen in the room.
That was going to be a ridiculously loaded receiver class, but you're right. They lost Jeremiah McClellan. They lost other guys that were going to be part of it, bigger receivers. But, if all you get out of it is Jeremiah Smith, Mylan Graham, and Demarion Witten, let's not forget him.
Right.
That's a pretty good haul. I bet it's going to be better than the 2022 class.
And
since they're all gone.
Well, they're all gone. At the time, that 22 class, there was a lot of hype around. It just, it just, you can bring in a lot of 4-stars in one class, but what's a 4-star in one class may not be a 4-star in the next class. And again, not talking badly there, but yeah, you got to get Mylan involved. We already saw what happened, after 22, they bring in Noah Rogers. He doesn't really get any run, and they lose him to NC State. Homesickness, but also it's dog eat dog in that room.
Yeah. Lathan Ransom was also a guy who alluded to Mylan Gray. We said the young receivers, when asked the same question. The first guy he said he's like, well, let's see. I think, James Peoples is a dog. That young running back coming up makes a lot of plays. And so it's always interesting. Like the first guy that gets mentioned is makes you perk your ears up. So James Peoples being mentioned by Lathan Ransom, that's another seal of approval for a guy who Lathan Ransom has become known for just slamming, like come crashing into the backfield and smashing into like top tier running backs. To be like, James Peoples is pretty good. So I think that's another one for people to watch out for. But I know we're all high on James.
Yeah, I had the chance to see him at the All-American Bowl in San Antonio. He is from San Antonio, so he was right there for it. But there was a lot of consternation. Ohio State lost a running back commitment to Miami. That happened 2 straight years. Mark and myself, and just pretty much everybody on staff's like, don't fret. I mean, James Peoples is him. He's the guy. And you just look at him and he's just built different. I mean, he's just, just got just tree trunk legs. And I think he's going to be somebody that's really going to shine. And, nothing's going to be handed to him. I mean, it's going to be running back by committee, but bringing in C.J. Donaldson, who they can't necessarily talk about too much because they haven't necessarily seen him. But
right.
But I think it's very encouraging with James Peoples because of them losing Trey Henderson and Quinshon Judkins.
Yeah, I think James Peoples is a 1,000-yard rusher all day long. I think
they play 16 games,
and with the way they split up these reps, and we'll see what Sam Williams-Dixon can do in any one of these 3 running backs, true freshmen coming in. But he's dynamic, and I think everybody is expecting good things from him. One of the last things here is everybody that has been asked about, hey, your thoughts on Jim Knowles leaving. Again, these are all defensive guys. They're all happy for him. And I think that tells you like how close knit this defense was, that even now that everybody's going their separate ways of this group, nobody's like, F that guy. It's like, I'm happy for him. He's from that area of the country. And I think it was, Denzel Burke. Oh man, I'm happy for him. They still got to see the Buckeyes now.
It'll be interesting there. I mean, obviously, Penn State now has 2 very highly regarded coordinators with Cole Nickey on offense and Knowles on defense. There's not a lot of room for James Franklin to hide anymore at this point. But yeah, I mean, it would really come across as petty if these with these guys at this point were like, Benedict Arnold, whatever, whatever. I mean, I don't even want to put words out there that could be taken out of context, but I think it's a good thing to see at this point. It's going to be very interesting when Ohio State and Penn State match up here in the regular season. And,
big noon.
I'm sure it'll be a big noon game. Hell, play it at 10 a.m. Let's make everybody angry. But it might not be the only time they meet.
It's true.
I mean, obviously, Ohio State and Oregon are your co-favorites. I think with Sports Betting AG sent us lines for conference champions, and Ohio State and Oregon were both 2-1. I think Penn State was 3-1 though, so I mean it was right there.
You mentioned like there's nowhere for James Franklin to hide. I think he can hide in plain sight in the playoffs every year, like they did this year. So there you go. That's basically everything that I heard today. And I mean, you're running around behind all of the cameras, so.
I don't hear anything.
Exactly. And there were a lot of cameras. I just said you had 3 going. It's a complete madhouse. This is my first one. I thought it would be, it's kind of, to compare it to the Big Ten Media Days, it's like Big Ten Media Days, but more.
I mean, compacted into, really interviews are broken into like 3-hour segments, but we have been here 8-9 hours or whatever. And after this video and after we get it posted, I think finally then we'll be able to tap out and head back to the hotel and go find some dinner.
Yes, that's a great idea. So you know what? I was going to go another hour, but since you said you wanted to get done with the show, we'll just go ahead and wrap there. If you're watching on YouTube, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up. We would appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel if you have done so. And of course, hit the bell to be notified when we drop shows like this. Fortunately, you can't really go live because the internet here is not stellar. So we're doing what we can. But we do want to thank you all for tuning in. And of course, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We're talking about all of this. Find us there at the Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus, where we're talking about this, recruiting, the upcoming season, all of the position battles, and everything we're hearing and seeing. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.